If you enjoy deep dives into hidden histories and the complex tapestry of the Cold War, please consider following this channel for more stories like this. The year was 1983. The air in Hampton, Virginia, was thick with humidity and the constant low-frequency hum of military hardware. From Langley Air Force Base, headquarters of the Tactical Air Command, jets screamed across the sky, painting white contrails against a pale blue canvas. Down by the water, the Norfolk Naval Base, the world's largest, was a city unto itself, a fortress of gray steel and simmering geopolitical tension. This was the environment, the background radiation, against which normal life played out, and nothing was more normal than the McDonald's on Mercury Boulevard. Arthur Jenkins was the manager of this specific franchise. He was a man defined by order, a devotee of the corporate gospel handed down from Oak Brook, Illinois. Arthur was 47, with thinning hair combed precisely to cover a growing bald spot, and a belief system built on clean counters, optimized fryer times, and the sanctity of the employee manual. His world was a universe of binders, inventory sheets, and the satisfying click of the new digital time clock. He had worked for the corporation for 15 years, rising from a trainee in a cramped downtown store to the manager of this prime location, situated perfectly to catch the traffic from both the airbase and the nearby shipyard. His life was one of rigid routine. He woke at 5 a.m. He was at the store by 6 a.m., an hour before the breakfast shift, to inspect the walk-in freezer, check the deliveries, and ensure the milkshake machine had been properly sanitized by the night crew. He prided himself on running the tightest ship in the district. His store consistently won awards for speed of service and store cleanliness. To Arthur, the Golden Arches were not just a logo, they were a symbol of American efficiency, a beacon of predictable comfort in an increasingly chaotic world. The news on the small, grainy television in the break room spoke of an evil empire and new missiles in Europe, but in here, Arthur controlled the variables. In May of that year, a new employee was hired. The application was standard. Name, Leo Peterson. Age, 24. Previous experience, various food service roles, upstate New York. He was quiet, almost unnervingly so. During the interview, Arthur had noted his peculiarities. Leo's eyes were a pale, flat gray, and he maintained almost perfect, unblinking eye contact. He was thin, with a wiry strength, and he spoke in short, precise sentences. He had no references, claiming his last employer had gone out of business. But he was willing to work nights and weekends. In the high-turnover world of fast food, availability was king. Arthur hired him on the spot. Leo, as he came to be known, was an enigma. But he was also, to Arthur's managerial delight, a perfect employee. He showed up exactly 10 minutes before every shift. His uniform was always immaculate. He learned the grill in a single day, a process that took most trainees a week. He could anticipate the lunch rush, prepping patties and dressing buns with a fluid, economical motion that bordered on the robotic. He was clean. While other teenagers leaned on their mops, Leo would meticulously scrub the grout between the floor tiles, disassemble the soft-serve machine for deep cleaning without being asked, and organize the dry storage room according to a system Arthur hadn't even implemented. The other employees, mostly local high school kids, found him odd. They called him Lurch, or Robot Leo, behind his back. He never joined their conversations about music or movies. He never ate the food. While the crew would share fries and burgers on their break, Leo would sit in the corner of the break room, eating a dense dark bread and a piece of hard cheese he brought from home, wrapped in wax paper. He would sometimes read, not magazines, but complex-looking pamphlets or a small dog-eared book with a cover Arthur couldn't decipher. Arthur, however, valued results. Leo's efficiency was remarkable. He never called in sick. He never complained. He simply worked, his face a mask of neutral concentration. Arthur saw in Leo a reflection of his own values, diligence, precision, and a lack of unnecessary sentiment. He even considered him for a shift manager position. The only strange thing Arthur noted in the first few months was Leo's peculiar interest in the restaurant's layout. He'd asked Arthur, in his flat monotone, about the building's wiring, the schedule for the armored car that picked up the cash deposits, and the exact patrol times of the local police. Arthur, flattered by what he assumed was professional curiosity, had answered him. "Good to know the whole operation, Leo," Arthur had said. "That's how you get ahead." Leo had simply nodded, his gray eyes unreadable. "Yes, Mr. Jenkins, the whole operation." The summer of 1983 settled over Hampton like a heavy, wet blanket. The air was still, the heat amplifying the smell of fryer grease and asphalt. Inside the McDonald's, the air conditioning fought a losing battle. It was during this period of oppressive stillness that Arthur Jenkins began to notice the small inconsistencies, the hairline fractures in the perfect facade of his star employee, Leo Peterson. They were nothing tangible, nothing he could write in a formal report, but they accumulated like static electricity. It began with Leo's relationship with technology. The new Series 400 cash registers were the pride of the franchise. They were complex, with dozens of pre-programmed keys. Leo, however, operated the machine with a speed and dexterity that was unsettling. He didn't just know the keys, he seemed to understand the logic of the machine. One afternoon, the register at the drive-thru window jammed, displaying a cryptic error code. The shift manager, a teenager named Jenny, was on the verge of tears. Arthur was already on the phone with the regional technician, a call that would mean at least 2 hours of downtime. Leo, who was on the grill, calmly walked over. He looked at the screen, his head tilted. "It's a memory buffer overflow," he said, his voice barely audible over the beep of the fryer. He asked Jenny to step aside. Then, in a rapid sequence that Arthur could barely follow, Leo's fingers flew across the keypad, entering a series of commands and key turns that were not in any manual. The screen flickered, the machine whirred, and the register drawer popped open. The error was gone. "How did you do that?" Arthur asked, stunned. Leo wiped his hands on his apron. "The manual for the machine's processor, the Intel 8085, is available at the public library. The error protocol is standard." He then returned to the grill, leaving Arthur staring at the functioning register, a knot of confusion in his stomach. Who reads the technical manual for a microprocessor to work a fast food job? Then there were the notes. Arthur was a stickler for the clean-as-you-go policy. He'd often see Leo in the dining area during a lull, wiping down tables, but Leo always had a small 5-cent notebook and a pencil with him. He would stop, stand near the front windows, and seem to be observing the traffic on Mercury Boulevard. He would jot something down in his notebook, then continue wiping. Arthur assumed he was drawing, or perhaps writing poetry. One day, Arthur found a page that had fallen from the notebook near the trash receptacle. It was covered in a dense, angular script. It wasn't poetry, and it wasn't drawings. It looked like a form of shorthand, but interspersed with what looked like license plate numbers and delivery truck logos. Beside them were notations. 0814, Cisco, 0822, USF Sedan, 4G2148, 0830, Armored Transit. Arthur felt a chill. He confronted Leo, holding the paper. "Leo, what is this? Are you keeping track of our suppliers?" Leo's expression did not change. He took the paper from Arthur's hand. "I am practicing a memory system, Mr. Jenkins. It helps me improve my efficiency. Observing patterns, it is a mental exercise." The answer was so plausible, yet so fundamentally strange, that Arthur had no response. What rule in the employee handbook did this break? Well, just do it on your own time, not on the floor. "Yes, Mr. Jenkins," Leo replied, pocketing the paper. But Arthur noticed he never stopped. He just became more discreet. The strangest incident, however, occurred in the break room. Leo always took his break at exactly 3:15 p.m., a non-peak time. He would go to the payphone mounted on the wall outside the restaurant, near the drive-through lane. Arthur, filling his cup with the lukewarm coffee from the break room pot, watched him through the window. Leo would dial a number, listen for a few seconds, then hang up. He would not speak. He would dial a second number, listen, and hang up. Finally, he would dial a third number, and this time he would speak a single word, something Arthur couldn't make out, before hanging up and returning to his shift. This sequence, dial, listen, hang up, dial, listen, hang up, dial, speak one word, hang up, was repeated every day. It was a ritual. Arthur's managerial mind raced. Was it a bookie? A complicated family arrangement? It didn't make sense. It was inefficient. It was, more than anything, patterned. And Arthur Jenkins, a man who built his life on patterns, was beginning to feel a deep, unsettling fear of this one. He was no longer just a curious manager, he was a worried one. But he had no idea what he was worried about. He was just a man who sold hamburgers, and he was completely, terrifyingly out of his depth. The discovery, when it finally happened, was not cinematic. It did not involve a shadowy informant or a secret message. It happened, as most real-world turning points do, by pure, banal accident. It was a Tuesday in late October, a day of relentless, driving rain. The restaurant was slow, the sound of the downpour drumming on the roof mixing with the melancholy jingle of a new McNuggets promotion. Arthur was in his small, cluttered office, engaged in his least favorite monthly task, inventory reconciliation. The numbers weren't matching. The new McNugget inventory system was a mess, and Arthur was short 3 cases of sweet and sour sauce. Frustrated, he slammed the binder shut and decided to do a physical count of the dry storage room, a cramped space behind the kitchen filled with floor-to-ceiling metal shelves. He was in the back, counting boxes of straws and styrofoam clamshells, when his frustration got the better of him. He reached for a heavy box of ketchup packets on the top shelf, but his grip slipped. The box toppled, striking another, and cascading in a slow-motion disaster. Boxes of napkins, plastic cutlery, and straws rained down. Arthur cursed, a rare indulgence. He knelt, the concrete floor cold against his polyester trousers, and began to clean up the mess. It was under the bottom shelf, in a space that was almost never seen, that he noticed it. A small, dull gray object. He reached for it, assuming it was a lost cleaning brush or a piece of a broken machine. His fingers closed around it. It was not plastic. It was metal, cold and heavy. He pulled it out. It was a cylinder, about 6 inches long and 2 inches in diameter. It was painted a flat, non-reflective gray, the color of a battleship. It seemed to be solid steel. There were no markings on it, but as he turned it over in his hands, he saw a tiny hairline seam, suggesting it could be twisted open. He tried, but it wouldn't budge. He shook it. Nothing. His first thought was that it was a pipe bomb. His heart hammered against his ribs. He wanted to drop it, to run out of the office, to call the police. But he was Arthur Jenkins. He was a manager. He handled problems. He looked closer. It didn't look like a bomb. There was no fuse, no timer. It was just a thing. A solid, heavy, meticulously crafted thing. He set it on his desk, staring at it. Then he returned to the storeroom, his mind reeling. He looked at the space where he'd found it. Tucked behind the metal leg of the shelf, there was a small cloth-wrapped packet. His hand trembled as he picked it up. It was an oilskin cloth, and inside was a folded, crumpled piece of paper. He unfolded it in his office, the gray cylinder sitting like a paperweight. It was a map, not a road map from a gas station. It was a topographical survey map, the kind the military used. It showed the entire Hampton Roads area, and it was covered in markings. Not in English, but in the same strange, angular shorthand he had seen in Leo's notebook. There were circles, dozens of them. One circle was drawn precisely around his McDonald's. Another was centered on the main runway at Langley. A third was over a specific pier at the Norfolk Naval Base. A fourth, he noted with a sickening lurch, was over the new communications array near the shipyard. The room suddenly felt very cold. This was not drugs. This was not a prank. This was something else. This was something from the news, from the grainy TV in the break room. He thought of Leo, of his flat gray eyes, his memory system, his precise technical knowledge. He thought of the license plates he'd been writing down, USAF Sedan 4G2188. Arthur sat down, his legs weak. The smell of the fryers, usually a comfort, now seemed nauseating. He looked at the cylinder, a thing with no purpose. He looked at the map, a map with too much purpose. He was just a man who sold hamburgers. But in his hand, he held something that felt heavy, not just with its physical weight, but with the weight of a world he had never wanted to know. He did not call the police. He was too scared. Who would believe him? They would think he was crazy. He did the only thing a man of rigid routine could do. He hid the evidence. He wrapped the map back in the oilskin, put it inside the metal cylinder, and then, In a move of profound, uncharacteristic paranoia, he did not put it in his desk. He took it home. He hid the cylinder in his garage, at the bottom of an old bag of fertilizer. He told himself he would figure out what to do in the morning. But as he lay in bed that night, listening to the rain and the distant sound of a jet, he knew his life, the orderly, predictable life of Arthur Jenkins, was over. A new Arthur Jenkins woke up the next morning. The man who lived by the employee manual was gone. In his place was a man living on a diet of stale coffee and raw fear. He did not call the police. He did not call the FBI. His mind, conditioned by decades of corporate problem-solving, could not process this level of threat. Instead, he fell back on the only skill he had: management. He would manage this. He would observe. He would document. He began his own, deeply amateur and profoundly terrifying surveillance of Leo Peterson. He went to the restaurant, the heavy dread in his stomach warring with the familiar scent of breakfast. He saw Leo at the grill, flipping hotcakes with his trademark, unsettling precision. Leo looked up as Arthur entered, nodded his usual curt greeting, and returned to his work. "He doesn't know I know," Arthur thought, the words looping in his head. "He doesn't know I found it." Arthur spent the day in his office, pretending to work on the schedules. But his door was open a crack, and his eyes were fixed on the small convex security mirror that gave him a distorted view of the kitchen. He watched Leo. He watched him move. He watched him talk to no one. He watched him clean the milkshake machine with a focus that now seemed less diligent and more analytical. Was he looking for a place to hide something else? Was the machine itself compromised? Arthur started taking notes. He used the back of a waste promo form. He documented everything. 9:14 a.m. Leo restocks the napkin dispensers, spends 3 minutes longer than average in the dining room, wiping tables or observing customers. A man in a blue suit was reading the Wall Street Journal. Leo seemed to look at him. 11:30 a.m. Lunch rush. Leo is on the grill. His efficiency is perfect. He produces 120 burgers in 60 minutes. He doesn't sweat. 3:15 p.m. Leo's break. Arthur's heart pounded. He watched from his office window as Leo went to the payphone. The ritual. Dial. Listen. Hang up. Dial. Listen. Hang up. 3:17 p.m. Dial. This time, Arthur focused, trying to read his lips. Leo spoke. A single word. It looked like, "Duh." Just duh. Then he hung up and returned. "Duh. Yes." That night, Arthur didn't go home. He told his wife, Mildred, that he had to do a double shift to cover for a no-show. The lie tasted like ash. He waited in his car, a bland Ford Escort, in the parking lot of the convenience store across the street. He was terrified. What was he doing? Playing spy? He was a McDonald's manager. At 10:05 p.m., Leo's shift ended. He emerged from the store, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He did not get into a car. He walked. Arthur started his Escort, his hands slick on the wheel, and followed at a distance, his headlights off as much as possible. Leo's route was indirect. He walked for 2 miles, not to an apartment building, but to a small suburban park that was closed at dark. Arthur parked, his breath fogging the windows. He watched as Leo sat on a park bench. He just sat for 30 minutes, unmoving, as if waiting. Was he meeting someone? Finally, another man appeared, walking a dog. The man was nondescript in a jogging suit. He walked past Leo, and as he did, he dropped the dog's leash. As he bent to pick it up, he and Leo spoke, a brief, hushed exchange. The man stood, tugged the dog's leash, and walked away. Leo remained on the bench for another 5 minutes, then stood and walked in the opposite direction toward a bus stop. Arthur was shaking. This was real. This was happening. He had seen it. A drop. A meeting. He drove home, well past midnight, and was physically ill in his own driveway. The next day, Arthur escalated. He felt a strange, manic energy. He was in this. He was part of it. He went to the restaurant, and during the busiest part of the lunch rush, when Leo was chained to the grill, Arthur went to the employee lockers. Leo used locker number 12. It was locked with a simple combination lock. Arthur, as manager, had the master key. His hands fumbled with the key. He opened the locker. It was almost empty. A clean, folded change of clothes, a pair of worn-out sneakers, and the small, dog-eared book he always read on his break. Arthur picked it up. The cover was in a language he couldn't read. It was Cyrillic. The title, he would later learn, was Technical and Tactical Data. U.S. Air Force. He put the book back, his blood running cold. He closed the locker, his mind racing. The map, the cylinder, the phone calls, the park, the book. It was a mosaic, and the picture it formed was one he could no longer deny. His best employee, the quiet, efficient man he was going to promote, was not who he said he was. He was an operative, a professional, and Arthur Jenkins, a middle manager from Hampton, had just confirmed it. He was now a witness, and he had a terrible, sinking feeling that witnesses, in this kind of world, did not last long. The weekend passed in a blur of surreal normality. Arthur served on the PTA board for his son's high school. He attended the Saturday meeting, listening to a heated debate about the budget for the new marching band uniforms, all while the Cyrillic titled book and the gray metal cylinder screamed in his mind. He smiled at the other parents. He drank the weak coffee. He felt like he was floating above his own body, a ghost haunting his own life. By Monday, the paranoia had hardened into a desperate, brittle resolve. He couldn't go on like this. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. The not knowing was worse than the knowing. He had to do something, but what? He still couldn't go to the authorities. The fear was too deep. They would take the problem away, but they would also take him, his life, his reputation, his credibility. He would be the crazy McDonald's manager who thought his fry cook was a spy. He would be ruined. No, he had to handle this himself. He would use the only tools he had, the corporate structure. He decided to confront Leo, not as a spy, but as an employee. He would use the handbook as his shield. He waited until 2:00 p.m., the dead time after lunch and before the after-school rush. The restaurant was quiet, save for an elderly couple sharing a coffee and the hum of the ice machine. He asked Jenny, the shift supervisor, to cover the front. Then he walked over to Leo, who was meticulously cleaning the stainless steel prep surfaces. "Leo," Arthur said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Can I see you in my office, please?" Leo turned, his gray eyes registering no surprise. He simply nodded, wiped his hands on a clean towel, and followed Arthur. Arthur's office was small, the walls covered with laminated charts, sales goals, and an Employee of the Month plaque. It was Arthur's fortress. He sat behind his metal desk, the map and cylinder now a toxic presence in his mind. Leo stood in front of the desk, perfectly at ease, his posture relaxed but alert. Arthur cleared his throat, pulling out a performance review folder for show. "Leo, I wanted to talk to you about a few irregularities I've noticed." "Yes, Mr. Jenkins?" Leo's voice was the same flat monotone. "It's about your activities during work hours." Arthur was on shaky ground. "I've seen you taking extensive notes about suppliers, delivery times, even security patrols." He'd expected a denial, a confused look. He got nothing. Leo's expression did not flicker. "It is a memory exercise, as I explained." "And your locker?" Arthur pressed, his heart hammering. "I was doing a routine check and I found your book. The one in Russian." A flicker, not of fear, of interest. Leo's head tilted, almost imperceptibly. "You opened my private locker, Mr. Jenkins? That is against company policy, Section 4, Paragraph 2, Employee Privacy." Arthur was floored. He was being quoted the manual he had built his life around. "I have a master key for inventory purposes," Arthur stammered, feeling the power dynamic shift horribly. "And the book?" Leo asked, his voice still calm. "I am bilingual. It is not illegal to read Russian. It is a technical manual. I find our Air Force's technology fascinating." The explanation was perfect. It was logical. It was airtight. And it was a complete and utter lie. Arthur felt a surge of desperate anger. The corporate script had failed him. He abandoned it. "I was in the dry storage room," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "On Tuesday, I was cleaning up a spill under the shelf." This was it. The air in the tiny office seemed to crackle. Leo's posture changed. He didn't move. but he straightened. The bored, slightly vacant look of the fast food employee vanished, and something else, something cold, ancient, and incredibly dangerous, looked out of his eyes. The Leo persona dropped like a mask. "What did you find, Arthur?" He didn't call him Mr. Jenkins. He called him Arthur. The shift was so profound, so chilling, that Arthur almost couldn't speak. The man standing in front of him was not Leo Peterson. He had never been Leo Peterson. A metal tube," Arthur said, "and a map with markings, on the base, on the shipyard." Leo was perfectly still. He looked at Arthur, his gray eyes analytical, calculating. He was no longer looking at his boss. He was looking at a problem, a variable that had not been accounted for. He took a single silent step toward the desk. "Where is it?" he asked. His voice was different. The faint, nondescript American accent was gone, replaced by a slight, almost undetectable cadence. It's safe," Arthur lied, trying to sound brave. Leo looked at the office door, then at the window, then back at Arthur. He seemed to be measuring the room, the distance, the time. Arthur realized with a wave of absolute terror that this man was making a calculation. He was deciding what to do with the manager who knew too much. The seconds stretched into an eternity. The only sound was the beep, beep, beep of the drive-through sensor, a sound from a world that Arthur no longer belonged to. "I believe," Leo said, his voice a soft, reasonable murmur, "that you and I should have a longer discussion, away from here. We will take a drive. You will show me where you put the item, and we will resolve this administrative issue." It was not a request. It was a command. Arthur was trapped. He had confronted the shadow, and now it was reaching for him. He was about to nod, to stand, to follow this man to his car, and, he was certain, to his end. And then, the bell on the front door of the restaurant chimed. The chime of the front door was a mundane sound, one Arthur had heard 1,000,000 times a day. But in that moment, it was a thunderclap. Leo's head snapped toward the door, his focus broken. Arthur, still seated, looked past him, through the office window and into the dining area. 2 men were walking toward the counter. They did not look like customers. They wore identical, ill-fitting gray suits. They were big, with the short, practical haircuts of government employees or military men. They moved with a purpose that was entirely different from that of someone ordering a filet-o-fish. They scanned the restaurant, their eyes missing nothing. They ignored Jenny at the counter, who was asking, "Can I take your order?" One of the men looked directly at Arthur's office. He saw Arthur, he saw Leo. He spoke into his lapel. In the office, Leo heard the man's voice, a distorted squawk from a hidden radio. Leo's body tensed, not in fear, but in preparation. He moved toward the office door, not to run, but to engage. "Arthur," he said, his voice a sharp, urgent command. "Stay down." Before Arthur could even process the instruction, the office door was kicked open. It didn't fly off its hinges like in a movie. The cheap particle board simply splintered around the lock and swung inward violently, hitting the filing cabinet with a crash. One of the men in the gray suits was in the doorway. He was not holding a weapon, but he held a small black radio in his hand. "Mr. Peterson," the man said, his voice a flat, official monotone. "We need you to come with us. Please place your hands on the desk." Leo did not place his hands on the desk. He looked at the man. He looked at Arthur, who was cowering behind his own desk. He looked at the shattered door. Then, in a gesture that stunned Arthur, Leo calmly brushed a piece of dust from his polyester McDonald's uniform. He adjusted his paper hat. "It seems," Leo said to the agent, "that my shift is over." He stepped out from behind the desk, raising his hands slowly. He offered no resistance. The second agent was behind him now. They did not put him in handcuffs, not in the restaurant. They simply flanked him, a hand on each elbow, and began to guide him through the kitchen. The kitchen staff, 3 teenagers, were frozen, a basket of fries suspended over the hot oil. They stared, wide-eyed, as the quiet, efficient grill cook was escorted out the back delivery door by 2 men who looked like they had stepped out of a government building. Arthur was left alone in his wrecked office, his heart beating so fast he thought it would burst. The first agent, the one who had spoken, turned back to him. He was younger than Arthur, but his eyes were old. "Mr. Jenkins?" the agent asked. Arthur nodded, unable to speak. "My name is Agent Hayes," the woman said, stepping in behind the man. She was the one who had been at the counter, the one he hadn't noticed. She was sharp, with her hair pulled back in a tight bun. "We need you to lock the restaurant. Tell your staff to go home. Tell them there's been a gas leak. Then you need to come with us. We have a lot to talk about." The scene was one of surreal bureaucratic efficiency. There was no drama, no shouting, just a quiet professional removal. Arthur, in a daze, walked out to the counter. Jenny was crying. "Mr. Jenkins, what's going on? Who were those men?" Arthur looked at her, then at the elderly couple who were still, obliviously, drinking their coffee. He cleared his throat. "Jenny, there's a problem with the gas line. It's a precaution. We need to close, immediately. Tell everyone to go home. The rest of the shift is paid." The transition was seamless. The arrest had been clinical. Leo, or whatever his name was gone. The restaurant, a symbol of American normality, had been breached. The agents had been watching all along. They hadn't been waiting for Arthur. Arthur's discovery, his amateur surveillance, his terrified confrontation. It was all a sideshow. He wasn't the discoverer. He was just a civilian contamination in a controlled federal operation. And now the operation had moved on to its next phase, cleaning him up. Arthur's debriefing did not happen in a police station. He was driven in the back of an unremarkable government sedan to a drab beige office building in downtown Newport News. There were no signs on the building, just a number. He was led through a series of gray hallways, the floors a polished, speckled linoleum, and into a windowless room. The room contained a metal table, 3 chairs, and a faint smell of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Agent Hayes, the woman from the restaurant, sat across from him. The large male agent was gone. She was polite, almost clinical. She offered him a coffee, which he accepted. It was terrible, but it was hot. "Let's start from the beginning, Mr. Jenkins," she said, opening a thin file. It was empty, save for a single yellow legal pad. "Tell me about Leo Peterson." Arthur talked. He talked for 3 hours. He told her everything: the hiring, the efficiency, the register trick, the notebook with the license plates, the payphone calls, the park, the book in Cyrillic, and finally, the cylinder and the map. Hayes listened, her face betraying no emotion. She took notes, her pen scratching against the pad. She did not interrupt. When he was finished, breathless and drained, he looked at her, expecting something. Praise, reassurance. She just looked at her notes. The cylinder. Describe it again. He described it. Gray, metal, 6 inches, heavy. And the map, the markings. You said they were near the airbase? Yes, the main runway. And the comms tower at the shipyard. And here. He tapped the table. My McDonald's. Why your McDonald's? She asked. It wasn't a rhetorical question. I don't know. It's on a main road. It's central, the payphone. The payphone, she repeated, nodding. And the cylinder. Where is it now, Mr. Jenkins? It's at my home, in my garage, in a bag of fertilizer. The words sounded insane when he said them out loud. Hayes sighed, a tiny, almost imperceptible sound of annoyance. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something other than professional detachment. It was pity, mixed with frustration. Mr. Jenkins, she said, leaning forward, you are a civilian. You manage a fast food restaurant. When you find an item you believe to be related to foreign espionage, you do not take it home. You do not put it in your fertilizer. You call the Federal Bureau of Investigation. What you did was monumentally foolish. You contaminated an active investigation. You put yourself, your family, and my team at risk. Arthur felt a flush of shame so hot it made him dizzy. I was scared. I didn't know who to call. I thought, you thought you could handle it. She finished for him. You thought you were a manager. You were not. You were a piece on a board you don't understand. We have been watching Leo Peterson, or as we know him, Major Alexei Volkov of the GRU, Main Intelligence Directorate, for 6 months. We knew about the payphone. We knew about his memory system. We were building a case, tracking his contacts, mapping his network. We were waiting for him to make contact with the other members of his cell, the ones at the shipyard. Arthur's world, which had already tilted, now inverted completely. You knew? You let him work? With the high school kids? He was a signals officer, Mr. Jenkins, not a hitman. His job was to observe, collate, and transmit. He was observing shipping lane traffic, flight patterns from Langley, and base security protocols. Your restaurant, with its high turnover of military personnel and shipyard contractors, and its perfect view of Mercury Boulevard, was the ideal observation post. The payphone was his signal drop. The cylinder you found was a dead drop cache. He was using your storeroom as his personal bank vault. Arthur was stunned. So, my call? My confrontation? Your confrontation today, Hayes said, her voice hardening, was reckless. It forced our hand. Volkov was spooked. We couldn't risk him running, or worse, activating his escape plan. We had to take him, and we had to take him now. It was messy, and now the rest of his cell is in the wind. We captured the low-level operative, but the network he was building is gone, scattered, because a McDonald's manager wanted to play spy. Arthur Jenkins had never felt so small. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even a participant. He was a complication. The interrogation, as he now understood it went on for another 4 hours. 2 more agents, specialists, came in. They took his house keys. A team will retrieve the device, Mr. Jenkins. We will need to be thorough. They were polite, but it was not a request. Finally, long after midnight, they let him go. Hayes drove him home. His house was lit up. There were 2 dark sedans parked outside. My team is just finishing, she said. They are very neat. As he got out of the car, she stopped him. Mr. Jenkins, this conversation never happened. Leo Peterson was arrested for immigration violations. He's being deported. The gas leak at your restaurant was real. You will tell no one. Not your wife, not your pastor, not your corporate supervisors. You are now, for all intents and purposes, a non-person in this matter. You are, however, also a person of interest. We will be watching you. We need to be sure you are not compromised. Do you understand? Arthur nodded, a hollow man in a polyester suit. Yes. Immigration. Good. Go home, Mr. Jenkins. Fix your office door. Forget this happened. He walked into his house. His wife was asleep. He went to the garage. The bag of fertilizer was slit open, its contents spilled on the floor. The gray cylinder was gone. They were, as Hayes had promised, very neat. The days that followed were a study in surreal, agonizing normality. Arthur returned to the McDonald's. He called a carpenter to fix the splintered office door. He told his staff, who were buzzing with rumors, that the gas leak had been a false alarm and that Leo had been called away for a family emergency back up north. He then had to fill out a termination form for Leo Peterson, citing job abandonment. The bureaucratic irony was so bitter it almost made him laugh. But the restaurant was no longer his sanctuary. It was a stage. He looked at the fry station and saw Leo's ghost, meticulously flipping patties. He looked at the payphone and imagined the invisible signals flying across the ocean. He looked at the storeroom and felt the cold, hard weight of the metal cylinder in his hand. He was, as Agent Hayes had promised, a non-person, but he was also a marked one. He began to notice the cars. A brown sedan parked down the street from his house, a blue coupe that seemed to be in his rearview mirror every time he drove to the bank. He would see the same faces at the grocery store, men who didn't look like they belonged, buying a single newspaper and a quart of milk. Was he being protected, or was he being watched? He was compromised, as Hayes had said. He was the civilian who had touched the poison. They were waiting to see if he showed symptoms. His behavior began to change. The man who lived by the clock became erratic. He was jumpy. He snapped at his employees for minor infractions. He would spend hours in his office just staring at the new, unscratched door. He lost weight. He stopped sleeping. His wife, Mildred, was a practical woman. She saw her husband, the most predictable man in the world, disintegrating before her eyes. She begged him to tell her what was wrong. "It's the stress, Arthur," she'd say. "You're working too hard. This job is too much." He wanted to tell her, He wanted to scream it. Our McDonald's was a spy hub. The grill cook was a GRU major. The FBI is tapping our phone. But he couldn't. He was bound by the invisible chains of national security, a concept that had, until a month ago, been nothing but a talking point on the evening news. So he said, "It's the new inventory system. It's very difficult." The corporation, too, noticed the change. Arthur's store, once the model of efficiency, began to slip. Sales numbers dipped. Customer complaints rose. His speed of service times were in the red. A district manager, a young hotshot named Brad, came to observe. He saw a manager who was distracted, nervous, and pale. 6 weeks after the incident, Arthur was called to a meeting at the regional office. Brad and a severe-looking woman from Human Resources sat across a polished table. "Arthur," Brad began, "we've been looking at the Hampton numbers, and frankly, we're concerned. This gas leak incident seems to have really thrown you off." "It was a stressful time," Arthur managed. "We think," the HR woman said, "that the stress of a high-volume red zone store like Mercury Boulevard might be too much for you right now. We value your 15 years of service, Arthur. We don't want to lose you, so we found a solution." He was not being fired. He was being managed. "We're transferring you," Brad said, smiling a synthetic corporate smile. "We have a franchise in Richmond that needs a seasoned hand. It's a quieter store. Lower volume. More. Your speed. A chance for you to get back on your feet." Arthur understood. He was being exiled. Richmond. 2 hours away. It was a demotion wrapped in the language of concern. He was being put out to pasture. He was the problem that corporate, just like the FBI, was cleaning up. He had been too close to the fire, and he had been scorched. He took the transfer. He and Mildred sold their house in Hampton, the house they'd lived in for a decade. As he packed his garage, he saw the stain on the floor where the fertilizer had spilled. A small, dark reminder. The last person he saw as he drove out of his neighborhood was one of the watchers, the man in the brown sedan parked at the corner. The man read his newspaper and did not look up as Arthur Jenkins drove away, leaving his life behind. Years dissolved. The 1980s, a decade of neon and nuclear anxiety, bled into the 1990s. Arthur Jenkins managed the McDonald's in Richmond. It was, as promised, a quieter store. He was a quieter man. The transfer had broken something in him. His meticulous, ordered mind had been shattered, and the pieces had never quite fit back together. He was a good manager, but the fire was gone. He was just a man doing a job. He and Mildred had drifted apart. The secret he held, the unexplainable stress that became his permanent personality, had built a wall between them that silence could not breach. They divorced in 1988, a quiet, civilized affair. He lived alone in a small apartment complex, his world shrinking to the restaurant, his apartment, and the television. The news was his only companion, his only connection to the vast, dangerous world he had once touched. And in November 1989, he watched, mesmerized, as people his son's age took sledgehammers to the Berlin Wall. He watched as the evil empire he'd heard about in the break room began to crumble, not with a bang, but with a cascade of concrete and cheering. Then, one cold February morning in 1990, he was drinking his coffee and watching the news before work. The anchor was discussing the new relationship between the United States and the dissolving Soviet Union. There was a segment on remnants of the Cold War. The screen cut to a live feed from Berlin, the Glienicke Bridge, the Bridge of Spies. It was a gray, overcast day. The anchor was explaining that a minor humanitarian exchange was taking place. A final closing of the books, the anchor called it. The camera zoomed in on a small group of men walking across the bridge, and Arthur Jenkins dropped his coffee mug. The mug shattered on his linoleum floor, but he didn't notice. He was staring at the man in the center of the screen. He was older, thinner, and wearing a heavy wool coat instead of a polyester McDonald's uniform. But the eyes were the same. The flat, gray, analytical eyes. The precise, economical way he moved. The set of his jaw. It was Leo. Among those being returned to the East, the news anchor said, her voice detached, is convicted operative Alexei Volkov, believed to be a GRU signals specialist. Volkov was arrested in Virginia in 1983 while posing as a fast food worker in an operation that compromised the security of the Norfolk Naval Yards. The clip lasted for 10 seconds. Volkov, Leo, walked across the white line, shook hands with a man in a fur hat, and disappeared into a black car. The broadcast cut back to the studio for a segment on the weather. Arthur sank into his chair. He was trembling. Alexei Volkov. His name was Alexei Volkov. He had been convicted. All this time, Arthur had assumed he was deported. That was the lie Hayes had fed him. Immigration violations. No, he had been tried, in secret, convicted, in secret. He had been in a federal prison for 7 years. Arthur looked at the shattered mug on his floor. All the paranoia, the fear, the destruction of his career, his marriage, his life. It had all been real. He hadn't been crazy. He had been a witness to history, a footnote. His monumental foolishness, as Hayes had called it, had led to this. His clumsy confrontation had brought down a GRU major. He had expected to feel something, vindication, relief, anger. Instead, he felt an overwhelming, crushing emptiness. He had been a cog in a machine. His personal tragedy was a 10-second news clip. His discovery, his fear, his sacrifice. It was just a final closing of the books. The man who had ruined his life was now free. A hero, perhaps, to his own people. And Arthur Jenkins was left alone in his small apartment with a broken coffee mug and a shift to prepare for. He was, as he had always been, just the manager. Arthur Jenkins retired in 1995. He did not have a party. He was given a gold-plated watch by the corporation, a handshake from a district manager he didn't know, and a modest pension. He moved to a small rental bungalow in a quiet neighborhood, far from any military base or major thoroughfare. His life became a series of small, quiet routines. He gardened. He read paperback novels. He watched the news, though it no longer held the same charge. The world had moved on. The Cold War was a subject for history books, a setting for movies. It was no longer the background radiation of daily life. He often thought about 1983. He thought about Agent Hayes and her cold, frustrating pity. He thought about his ex-wife, Mildred, and wondered if he could have saved his marriage by telling her the truth. He concluded, probably not. The truth was too big, too absurd. My manager's life was ruined by a spy he found in the storeroom. It sounded like a bad joke, and he thought about Alexei Volkov. He wondered what had become of him. Was he a general in the new Russian Federation? Was he, like Arthur, retired and living in a small apartment, reflecting on the strange turns of his life? Or was he a casualty of the new chaotic order that had replaced the old rigid one? One afternoon, Arthur found himself driving past the new modernized McDonald's. It was a sleek, boxy building, all glass and polished metal. He parked and went inside. The smell was the same. The grease, the sugar, the cleaning solution. It was the smell of his life. He ordered a black coffee and sat in a booth. He watched the employees. They were young, energetic, wearing bright new uniforms and headsets. A young man, the manager, was in the kitchen, his eyes darting between a computer screen and the grill, optimizing, organizing, controlling his variables. He looked efficient. He looked precise. Arthur took a sip of his coffee. He had come to understand something in his old age. The world was not run by rules and manuals. It was not a tidy, orderly place, no matter how much you cleaned the grout. The real world was a place of shadows, a world of metal cylinders and secret maps, of men who were not who they claimed to be. The Cold War, he realized, wasn't a war of bombs and armies. Not really. It was a war of systems. It was the rigid, paranoid, and secretive system of Volkov versus the open, efficient, and corporate system of McDonald's. And in the end, both systems had used their operatives and discarded them. Volkov, the GRU major, had been just as much a cog as Arthur, the store manager. Both had served masters who saw them as assets, and then liabilities. The great irony, Arthur thought, was that his McDonald's had been the perfect cover because it was a symbol of openness. It was the friendly, predictable face of America, and its very predictability had been turned into a weapon. He finished his coffee. He looked at the new efficient manager, shouting orders, and wondered. He wondered how many Leos were out there, how many quiet, diligent employees were operating registers, fixing computers, or driving taxis, all while observing, collating, and transmitting. He wondered if the great silent war had ever really ended, or if it had just changed uniforms. Arthur Jenkins left the restaurant. He walked out into the afternoon sun, a forgotten soldier from a war that was never declared, a war that had been fought in the break rooms and storerooms of his own life. He was, at last, at peace. He had done his inventory. The numbers finally matched. We appreciate you spending your time with this story. To support more historical narratives and deep dives into the unseen corners of history, please consider subscribing.